Welcome to Brain Talk, a podcast from Project BrainStorm about the bipolar spectrum. Your hosts are Dr. Jim Phelps, a psychiatrist and author of several groundbreaking books about bipolar, and Sara Schley, author of the memoir Brainstorm, From Broken to Blessed on the Bipolar Spectrum, and co-creator of Brainstorm the Film, coming to you in 2025. Here on Brain Talk, we'll interview new experts each week about their research and expertise within bipolar, and listeners will call in to ask questions. Let's work together to save lives, end the stigma, and create healing for everyone on the bipolar spectrum and those who love them.
Good morning, Dr. Phelps, or perhaps it's afternoon for you actually by now.
We're getting there. Nice to see you, whatever time of day it is.
It is, yeah. Today, we're welcoming one of the lead characters in the film, Dr. Devika Bhushan, and she's an amazing human being.
We also know her as Dr. Bhushan. I first met her indirectly as the former acting Surgeon General of California, who put out a recording of herself describing, I have bipolar 2, and simultaneously an editorial in the Los Angeles Times saying, I have bipolar 2. It was a huge advance in terms of breaking down stigma.
I was blown away. I got the link to that LA Times op-ed from actually my editor of the memoir, Jennifer Margulies, and she said, have you seen this? And I hadn't. And when I read it, I thought, you know, if I was as accomplished as Devika, this could be me. Like, she was describing exactly the same kind of cognitive breakdown that I had. So I reached out to her, you know, thinking I'd never get a call back from the Surgeon General. And she was so gracious to get right back in touch. And Devika's a big reason why we were connected with all the other characters in the film. Go, Dr. Bhushan.
Yes, indeed.
With no further ado, let's invite Dr. Devika Bhushan on the show. Dr. Devika Bhushan, welcome to Brain Talk.
Hi, it's so nice to be here.
Pleasure to have you on there, Doctor.
Just tell us a little bit, if you would, about your story. We know that we've mentioned that you live with bipolar. You're also a physician, a pediatrician. And
absolutely. It's such a joy to be here with two people that I enjoy spending time with immensely. My story really started when I was in my early 20s. I had graduated from undergrad and I was in my first summer of medical school. So I had finished my first year at Harvard and it had been a very tough, grueling year. And then I had a very intense summer where I was setting up a health program from scratch in a place I'd never been, speaking in my third language. Noticed towards the end of that summer that I just wasn't feeling like myself. And it was a feeling I'd never really had before. I was starting to feel depressed, but at the time I didn't really necessarily recognize that. My thoughts were very sluggish. I couldn't make sense of things. Social interactions were really sticky and hard, and coming up with the right thing to say to seem quote unquote normal was really, really hard. I would lie awake pretty much all night and get maybe a couple of hours of sleep in the dead of the night and then be awake as the sun was coming up. Mm-hmm. And I thought I would, come back to my quote regular life, and this feeling, this strange set of symptoms that I was experiencing would normalize and go away. But it actually got worse. I went to go visit my parents in the Philippines, which was 12 time zones away. Then I came back to Boston. It was really tough. It was the first time entering the second year of my medical training at medical school that I really struggled in school. Just couldn't make sense of what was on the page, what we were learning. Again, the social stuff, when people said, how was your summer? That was a really hard question for me to answer.
When I read your op-ed, the LA Times piece, which my editor for my memoir said, you've got to read this thing. Have you seen it? Because she knew my work. I was just stunned because exactly what you're describing was what happened to me at about the same age, where, I had been highly identified with my good brain. And I, all of a sudden, the simplest things, trying to pick up peanut butters or figure out socks, it was impossible. Like, where did my brain go? I felt at this point, because I'm now out of the closet with my bipolar, so to speak, super excited to meet you because, wow, there's someone who understands my experience from the inside out. And I've never met anyone like you.
Both of you academic whiz kids who just went
right
and couldn't function in even the most basic ways.
Yeah, I remember reading that part of your memoir when you were in undergrad and feeling so seen by the words and the way in which you described that experience. And I know you were in the room, when I was speaking about my own experiences for the BrainStorm filming, and we again had that parallel experience of feeling seen in each other's words.
It's quite dramatic because we're born on opposite sides of the planet, I think, more or less. You in the Philippines, me in Boston. We have different ancestral backgrounds. We're from different generations, that we have such a strong similarity in our experience. I found it very validating.
Seeing each of you talking like this is just reminding me is what it's like to sit with patients and discover, that was what I used to be like. That's how well I used to function. And this is how bad it is when I'm not functioning. The difference is just so huge.
And I think we shared this too. Your journey to your diagnosis took 25 years. Mine, luckily, only took about 3. But those were 3 really difficult years. And despite being somewhat of an insider and having a seat at the table within medicine, I still struggled to get the right diagnosis. And initially, I was diagnosed with unipolar depression. I was started on an SSRI, and that started to unmask for me symptoms of hypomania that were layered on top of the depression. Finally, I was on 3 different activating substances that induced a manic episode. And that frank manic episode saved me, right? Because it finally put me on the right track to being diagnosed as being on the bipolar spectrum, and then getting on mood stabilizers and other mood stabilizing behavioral regimen, which really, really made the difference.
Devika, you just described, so there I was, the very first medication I received was an antidepressant. And can you just tell us a little bit more about what happened? What was the feeling that went with getting on that medication?
I just felt like I had this activated energy and agitation. It was too much of everything. So too much irritability, too much energy, but without follow through. Like I would have grand ideas about things that I wanted to start, projects that I wanted to do, and trouble following through on them. And I would speak quickly. I would sometimes be really anxious, sometimes be really agitated, and sometimes be really excited or euphoric. And all of those things were sort of par for the course in those 2.5 years. It didn't feel like me. And people around me said, you seem really hyper. You seem too happy sometimes, or you seem like you're talking a lot more than you usually do. Things like that people were sort of picking up on, but that by itself didn't give rise to the diagnosis being made. Yeah. As a pediatrician, I have undertaken training by the Reach Institute, which helps situate pediatricians really to be effective first-line providers of mental health care to youth, which is sort of the status quo in this country right now. Most kids are coming into their pediatrician because of the dearth of child psychiatrists.
Sure.
And nowhere in our training, the teaching was, it'll be very obvious if a kid has an activated experience on an SSRI. But actually, the story is much more like what you and I have experienced, Sarah, which is you're slightly not yourself for a very long time until maybe the shoe drops. And it's very obvious that this is a very activating experience. And, I just a good friend of mine who has been on an SSRI for what seemed like unipolar depression for nearly a decade, then started on Wellbutrin on top of the SSRI. And she was just a little bit not herself, a little bit activated, just talking a lot more and feeling a little bit better about herself than is her typical, and not having much negative or critical, feedback about anything in her life. So just being in a really good place. Then she finally had a manic episode as well, which unmasked that she's actually on the bipolar spectrum. But, people can be on these medications and not quite feel like themselves for a very long time, and it's not recognized.
Right. That took a decade.
Yeah, it did. And
sure,
for whatever reason, maybe she's mild enough on the spectrum, on the bipolar spectrum, when she was on an SSRI by itself, it really did fine for her. And it was the addition of Wellbutrin, for whatever reason, that tipped her up into hypomania and then mania.
So I think kind of to summarize for our listeners who, may be having a devastating depression, you're diagnosed with unipolar, you're given SSRIs. If those SSRIs trigger a kind of mania or hypomania, irritability, reactivity that's not typical for your personality, that can be indicative or diagnostic of actually bipolar spectrum, right? And then that's a whole new ballgame. And then you can get on the path to getting the right treatment and the right medications.
Yes, precisely.
Which is kind of a miracle, like when you've been suffering for years or decades. For me, when I finally got the bipolar label, it was a blessing because then I could get the right treatment.
Yeah, for me too. When I first got the diagnosis, it was this huge ball of relief. I had been on this road for 2.5, 3 years at that point, and I had just started feeling like such a failure because I was not responding to medication after medication after medication in the way that I was supposed to. But we finally had a different answer, and it was the right answer. But I also felt a deep sense of shame and self-stigma about the diagnosis because up until that point, I didn't know anybody who had recovered from bipolar disorder. So I'd only seen people at their sickest with it in the emergency room, in the inpatient setting, as part of their treatment team. I didn't have hope for recovery and for the life that I had envisioned for myself. And it took me a little bit of time to really come to terms with who I was with this diagnosis.
Yeah. What worked for you in that, like in overcoming the self-stigma?
I think there were two big things. So one was attending a peer support group, which actually happened probably a decade thereafter, where I sat in a room full of people who had bipolar disorder and who were living their lives, lawyers, clinicians, people with families, people with kids, people with long-term partners, and people who had ups and downs and blips with their disorder, but also were able to do the kinds of things that they had wanted to do in their lives. And they were really, some of them were really thriving. And that really helped me. And the other thing that really helped me was getting a handle on the illness itself. So at the very beginning, I had no idea what it would take medication-wise and behavioral changes-wise to really get better and stay well. I had a total of 3 major episodes, all in the context of medical training in the first 5 years of my diagnosis, and then largely stayed well in the years intervening. The medical training, as one might imagine, was really high stress, as well as had a lot of circadian rhythm shifts and disruptions. 28-hour calls where you weren't sleeping for, let's say, 30 plus hours, day-night flips, and those kinds of things really were destabilizing for my brain, and I learned that the hard way. But once I understood that in addition to the medications, I needed regular sleep, regular exercise, regular sunlight exposure in the mornings, I just got myself to a place where I understood the disorder, and then I also really understood me within the disorder. Just having that degree of self-observation and time with the illness to really understand who I was within its context, and also that I had the capacity to live my life as a well person or as a person in recovery for many, many years without this kind of threat of the illness reemerging, and my feeling that, I was able to exert some control. Living with the illness, understanding myself better, understanding the illness better, really helped me get to a place where I felt a sense of self-efficacy over what direction my life was going to head in.
I have 2 thoughts based on what you just shared. One was that we're like a Stradivarius violin or something, that has to be tuned just right. And we learn how to tune our own instruments, right? So what works, there are themes about what's going to work for all of us. Jim will tell you, we, have to watch, like you were saying, Devika, watch our sleep, watch our diet, watch our exercise. There's all those themes that are going to work for everyone, but then I guess double click. And when in each of those, we kind of learn what we need to do to fine tune so that we can stay well. And the more that happens, the more, I guess, confidence we get that we can live well with this, right?
That's right.
Even a little gizmo as simple as a dawn simulator. So when you discover I need that light and I need it at a certain time, and here's this little tool I can use. I think, it's just part of developing a toolkit, not only devices and medications, but these behavioral tools as well.
I'll still call up one of my best friends, a therapist, and she's also called Sarah. And I say, Sarah, because I've been sobbing, right? And I'll say, a normal person would cry when they found out one of their dear friends has cancer, right? That's not a depression. That's like a normal response. And she'll say, yes, that's a normal response. You should be sad when you just found out your dear friend has cancer. I'll have to pinch myself. I'll call her up. Like, it's real okay to be thrilled that my kid got XYZ. Yep, that's good. That's normal.
Yeah, it's interesting that at the beginning, when we're first trying to get a handle on what feels like us versus what starts to feel a little bit out of range for us, and it might be a symptom, we really have to rely on friends and family. So for me, for hypomania, one of my tells is that I'll start sending several paragraph long responses to things on group chats. And I'll start, sort of picking small fights with people that I definitely don't need to pick. And it's, my husband noticing, or my mom noticing, or somebody in my life kind of saying, okay, that was a really long text message. Are you doing okay?
That's nice.
And, of course, if I'm doing fine, I find, I might find that a little bit frustrating or annoying for somebody to bring up, but it can be so helpful when you're first starting to understand what's normal for you.
And what would you do in that case if you got the feedback from someone you love and trust that, hey, that was a little bit fight picking?
If I feel like it's the early stages of hypomania, I tend to put my brain on ice, I like to say. So I go offline, go off of social media, because social media is such a revving up agent in many of our lives. I make sure that I'm not making any big decisions. I try to go into nature. I try to put myself off of devices in general. I try to go on long walks. I try to just sit and sit on my hands, if you will, and control that instinct to want to do a lot very quickly, because it's just that it sort of revs everything up and it makes things worse. And so usually those kinds of things, if I do that for a couple of days, then I come back to baseline.
Amazing.
Mm-hmm.
And you just described something which we have just a little hint of in the film about reward sensitivity, about the proclivity of one's brain to take a good thing and have it accelerate into the anticipation of more good things. So the activity and seeking of these good things increases. If I just ice my brain, because just normal, everyday, exciting things can be a little too much of a push at that moment.
Is it true, Jim and Devika, you guys are both experts. To me, it seems like there's like an exponential growth curve, a hockey stick, right? And if I can intervene on this end before it starts to accelerate, then I can stop that episode, which is very empowering, actually. So Devika now knows that, put my brain on ice. I didn't know when I was younger, so I just keep buzzing, and then it would get worse, and then a crash. And now I kind of have a similar sensibility a few decades down the line. One of my indicators, which I can feel in myself if I'm starting to feel irritable, because I'm not typically an irritable person. And so if I'm starting to feel that, I'm like, okay, like you would say now, now this is going to be my new phrase, time to put my brain on ice.
Yeah, absolutely. It's actually really hard to know what to do when you're hypomanic. It's harder to know what to do when you're hypomanic, I think, than when you're depressed. I think in hypomania, you feel so optimistic, you feel so energetic, you feel like, okay, I do want to go to this social event, I do want to start this new project, but actually understanding from the wisdom of who you are when you're not feeling that way, that those sorts of activities might actually spin you up further, and that the better part of valor is stepping back and resisting all of these impulses that your brain is having. But it can be hard to do in the moment. It's a matter of sort of setting up the resolve when you're feeling like yourself, when you're feeling well, and then just saying, okay, this is my plan when I feel this way.
Right. Yeah.
No matter what.
And I think it's similar for me, and I wonder what you would say, Devika, around if you're starting to feel symptoms of depression. What do you do then?
The self-loathing and the guilt and the self-deprecation pieces of depression, even when it's mild, can make things much harder. But in general, I also will spend more time outside, more time with close people who I can feel very comfortable being that version of myself with. I do continue to work if I can, to the extent that it's sort of self-paced. I might give it more time, more leeway, and not put as much pressure on myself to be, quote, productive. But I think that doing a little bit of work often helps. But if I have any podcast appearances or any speaking events during a phase where I'm feeling depressive, I might think very seriously about not having that happen while I'm feeling that way.
Decrease the stress.
You just described something so profound. Imagine Dr. Devika Bhushan self-loathing. Like, what? Are you kidding me? So I think, but this is so important because that slide into depression, in the same way that hypomania includes an increased confidence in oneself and mania includes grandiosity. Well, depression includes this self-deprecation, as you say, and worse, self-loathing. So, it's easier with all your achievements at least for us on the outside, to go, well, that's obviously a depression lie. But learning from experience that what sounds in your head like so utterly true is utterly false. It takes so much practice.
Absolutely. And it feels so real because, and this is part of the reason I try not to do socially demanding things when I'm feeling this way, because the gain on my self-loathing goes up when it interacts with my social anxiety, which also is a part of the picture. And if I'm interacting with somebody new that I'm starting to build a friendship with, let's say, or, just somebody that I've met for the first time, I then replay every element of the conversation and find fault with everything I said or didn't say and how I did that and all of it. So, I mean, everyone who's been depressed understands exactly what that feels like, but that then makes you feel so much worse. So for me, it's better to just not have those interactions when my brain is like this.
Yeah. Yeah, I've heard it referred to now as depressive psychosis. I had never heard that term before.
Yeah.
Basically, your brain is lying to you. Your brain is making up negativity. And I used to say, we would watch our mother, who had suffered from this pattern greatly, come up with such incredibly creative, horribly negative things about herself and about the world. It was painful how creative this negativity was. And I then came to understand this as depressive psychosis, and it's dangerous and it's heartbreaking. I think it's similar. What I've learned is, go back to basics. What am I eating? What am I drinking? When am I going to bed? Am I getting just try to slow it down and go back to basics, the self-maintenance basics, and things tend to turn around.
Yeah, and I would say with depression, when it's early on, I really try to sort of rev my energy up in different ways. So I'll make sure I'm doing a long walk in the morning or going to the gym and really like tiring myself out so that I'm getting good sleep. It's just getting myself into a different energetic place, even if it's a trick.
Dr. Bhushan, at one point you made this very courageous choice to tell your story in the LA Times, a massive media outlet. And I wonder if you could just take us back to that moment. What was going on for you in your life that you felt that it was time to tell your story in that public way?
So I was wrapping up my 7th month of having served as acting surgeon general for California. We had launched an initiative through COVID called the ACEs Aware Initiative, which is really rooted in healing from childhood trauma. And it felt very relevant while everybody else was truly in 2022 grappling with their own mental health issues in the wake of, COVID and a lot of related stressors that we were all experiencing. So it felt very relevant in that moment to just shine the light on what it can look like to live with a mental illness and have a family and have a career and still sometimes struggle, but really just have a place of acceptance around an illness that's as stigmatized and as difficult to live with as bipolar is. I think in that moment, I was looking up to mentors and and people who had shown that kind of a bright light for me, including Dr. Justin Bullock, who had shared his story when he was just an intern while going through medical training. I was thinking about my friend Andy Dunn, who had shared his story in that same year. And, folks like Patrick Kennedy and many others who were strong enough to step into their truths and step into their authenticity in ways that really ended up helping lots of people. And I wanted to be a small part of doing that.
I'm just curious as to where your professional life has gone. And it almost sounds as though that LA Times editorial gave it a little kick.
Yeah, I would say so in a lot of ways, because it helped me find community. It led me to a phase in my career, which has been really fun. I have the real privilege of serving as an advisor to a whole host of entities that work on well-being, resilience, and equity in different ways. Working with a colleague on a series of children's books about stress and resilience and how to work through really difficult moments in ways that actually help promote resilience and the capacity to handle stress better rather than the opposite. And so that's one project that I would say is still in its formative stages that I've been really excited about recently.
You are a pediatrician after all.
Exactly. What a wonderful application of a pediatric training. Dr. Bhushan, is there anything else that you want to share with our listeners? Anything else you'd like us to know that maybe we haven't asked?
I think that if anybody is feeling lost or hopeless or in the middle of their own struggle or that of a family member, know that there's so many resources and support structures out there, even when it feels really hard to know where to access them. One of them is NAMI, the National Alliance on Mental Illness. I serve on the board of directors for NAMI National, but every community, there's around 650 affiliates of NAMI whose job it is to set up local support groups and systems for people who are affected by mental illness in any way, whether that's a parent, a child, a sibling, or somebody who's struggling by themselves. There's education classes, support groups. And even though the experiences that we all have when we're struggling with mental illness are so canonical and so recognizable to others, we struggle to talk about it when it's happening to us, because it feels like we're literally outside of our minds and we're not sure when we're going to be back in the driver's seat. And it's really hard to seek out support in that moment. But know that there's so many ways that you can seek that support out, and that support can make the difference between feeling like you can do it and feeling the opposite.
So we'll have those in the show notes, and we also have NAMI and DBSA on the resources page on BrainStorm the film, along with Dr. Phelps's wonderful website and many other things. And are you still writing a Substack?
It used to be, a weekly Substack, and it was a big part of what I was working on. And I think that it has now become every 4 to 6 week Substack. It's brought me in community with a lot of folks that I just really appreciate knowing.
And for those of us who aren't that familiar with Substack, again, we'll have it in the show notes, but how do they find you? How do we find you on Substack?
So it's askdrdevikaB.substack.com, and the link is going to be in the show notes.
Yes.
But if you'd like to join the community, a lot of what my Substack focuses on is mental illness, recovery, and health topics writ large. So things like, how do you get distance from screens? How do you sleep better? Including some of the techniques that we've talked about today.
Lucky us. I'm a fan. And it's always really informative and brilliant as you are. So Devika, Dr. Bhushan, thank you so much for everything you are and everything you're doing, and for joining us today on Brain Talk. It has been an absolute pleasure to have the privilege of connecting with you.
It's been so fun to be here with you, Sara and Jim. Thank you for all that you do to make this world a better and healthier place.
Well, once again, we've had another wonderful experience. These are the kinds of things that I just feel really thankful for the opportunity to talk with people like Dr. Devika Bhushan.
You never know the things you're going to do that feel like they're taking courage, how that's going to ripple out and the impact that it's going to have. And for her to step forward, having never been public, as a very public figure, and tell her story. I am bipolar on the LA Times. That just opened up a whole world for us.
Really huge.
You know, everybody we met who's been on this show and in the film, Greg, the wonderful Major General Greg Martin, the wonderful Dr. Andrea Vasalev, Molly Kawahata, the amazing Molly Kawahata, and there's several more who are in this tribe that she talked about of being willing to be courageous and truthful, but also really having heart to want to help other people not suffer. And she opened that door and brought us all together. It was really, really brilliant and beautiful. Okay. Well, till next time. Okay. Thanks for joining us on BrainTalk.
Thanks so much for joining us on BrainTalk, our bipolar spectrum podcast. BrainTalk is a program of BrainStorm, a multi-platform project about the bipolar spectrum, which includes Sara Schley's memoir and a full-length documentary coming in 2025. We aim to save lives, crush stigma, and maximize healing for all people living with bipolar and those who love them. For more information, head to www.brainstormthefilm.com. To call in to a future episode and ask questions, go to brainstormthefilm.com/podcasts.